There are few voices in entertainment that are as instantly recognizable as that of James Earl Jones, the actor responsible for bringing to life legendary characters such as Darth Vader in Star Wars,
I am your father,
and Mufasa in The Lion King, who has passed away at the age of 93.
Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become.
In this video, we'll be celebrating his legacy by taking a look at how Jones came to voice Mufasa and all the times he's returned to the role in the 30 years since the release of The Lion King. James Earl Jones was born in Mississippi in 1931 before being raised by his grandparents on their farm in Michigan. Despite expressing gratitude for his upbringing, Jones found the transition to living there traumatic at the time, to the extent that he actually developed a stutter. This was so severe that he resigned to being completely mute throughout his early years of education.
And what was it like? You were eloquent in talking about the need for expression.
You learn that when you can't talk. It's not that you yearn to talk so much, but you appreciate those who can, you know.
This was up until high school, when an English teacher acknowledged his ability to write poetry and encouraged Jones to read his work aloud to the class.
He said, "Do you like these words? Do you like the way they sound in your head?" He said, "Well, they sound 10 times better when you give them out in the air. It's too bad you can't say these words." He began to challenge me, to nudge me toward speaking again.
It's incredibly inspiring to think that had this not been the case, one of the greatest voices in history may never have been heard. As after gaining his confidence and practicing repeatedly, Jones would discover the deep, resonating voice that we all know today.
1, 2, 3.
Though it wasn't until his debut in Star Wars that the actor reached new levels of iconography as the voice of Darth Vader, for which Jones spent only a couple of hours in a recording booth and requested not to be credited for his work, deeming the dubbing in of his voice to just be special effects on top of the physical performance from David Prowse.
I had to find the grace in me to accept that that's what I was worth. I was special effects.
Despite this, James Earl Jones would become synonymous with the character for the rest of time, and any directors looking for a low and powerful vocal performance knew who to call. Which is exactly what Roger Allers and Rob Minkoff did in the early 90s, when they cast Jones as Mufasa, the noble king of the Pride Lands and father to Simba in The Lion King.
A king's time as ruler rises and falls like the sun. One day, Simba, the sun will set on my time here.
And will rise with you as the new king.
Goosebumps.
Other actors considered for the role included Sean Connery, Timothy Dalton, and Liam Neeson, but the unique reverberating bass of Jones's voice was deemed to be most similar to that of an actual lion.
His voice gets into these such deep registers that he almost really literally sounds like a lion. I mean, his voice rumbles.
Remember.
Thus, he was offered the part without the need for an audition. Jones stated that, quote, "One of the reasons that I took this job was because of the impression the drawings and animation had on me. It was really grand stuff. I also enjoy creating characters with just my voice. It's interesting to experiment and try it different ways until you get the right sound." Which is exactly what he does in these outtakes, in which he can be heard performing vocal warm-ups.
1527, take 1, Wild Roars.
No, keep it rolling. I just want to try several things. There's a sound down in the throat somewhere. I just don't know how to reach it.
This is how the development of Mufasa's character continued from the storyboards into the recording booth, as Jones admitted that his initial perception of him was a powerful and even arrogant ruler, before realizing that the most important aspect of Mufasa wasn't that he was a king, but that he was a father.
I was playing him as just king. The dialogue was just some regal, authoritative stuff. The storyboards all around the recording room
well, this proud and almost arrogant king, and I made the mistake of playing into that. And the more I got to know Jonathan's voice and got to know the nature of his character, the more I realized that, and we all realized that there's something else going on here.
They said, what do you like as a father? I said, well, I'm really a dopey dad. And so they began to impose my facial expressions onto Mufasa and a different tone of voice.
And eventually, what we achieved was a doting father with a very dopey grin on his face. The dopey grin is mine. His only eye grin like that.
Yeah, he was authoritative, but he was just a gentle dad.
In hindsight, this formed the backbone of the entire movie, as if the audience didn't care for Mufasa, then the whole story wouldn't have worked. The fact that it did is a testament to Jones's endearing performance.
Let me tell you something that my father told me. Look at the stars. The great kings of the past look down on us from those stars.
Early drafts of the film featured a song to be performed by Mufasa, titled To Be King.
To be king is a huge obligation. It's not just a license for fun.
But this would promptly be removed upon the casting of James Earl Jones, as he jokingly brings up in an interview.
They told me later that they had written a song for Mufasa. And I guess when they hired me, they immediately hit it. To spare you.
Whilst the song also emphasised the proud, regal side of Mufasa, which, as we know, was toned down in the final product. Something that certainly wasn't toned down was Mufasa's death scene, which is probably the first thing that comes to mind when thinking of the character, and to this day remains one of the most iconic death scenes in cinema history.
Long live the king.
For me, this was the first introduction to the concept of death that I can remember. And as a result, I think I've subconsciously kind of dreaded the passing of James Earl Jones in real life, as now the whole thing feels a lot more real.
It is dark. When young Jonathan tries to wake me, his papa, up from the dead after the stampede, it's one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen, more heartbreaking than Bambi. So that influence hangs over the whole story from then on. It's unrelieved. It then highlights when something good happens.
It wasn't until a later draft that it was decided that Mufasa should return in spirit form towards the end of the movie, acting as Simba's motivation to return to the Pride Lands and creating yet another iconic scene in the process.
He lives in you.
For this, Jones provided a more intense and focused performance, with the bass of his voice echoing and rumbling through the air as the overbearing spirit of Mufasa.
You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are.
He can be heard for the final time in the closing moments of the 1994 classic. But as it turns out, there was more Lion King media to come, and interestingly, more appearances from James Earl Jones as Mufasa. Circle of Life, an environmental fable, was a short film that could be watched in the Land Pavilion at Epcot in Walt Disney World from 1995 until 2018. The film is yet to be officially released, so we only have off-screen recordings, but in them you can clearly hear Jones as Mufasa, providing the opening narration for the film.
All things exist together in a delicate balance. And so we must respect every living thing, because we are all connected in the great circle of life.
1998's The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, alludes to the presence of Mufasa throughout, with his spirit observing the presentation of his granddaughter Kiara in the opening sequence. Elements such as the sunlight and the wind are used to signify Mufasa's influence, allowing him to communicate without actually speaking throughout most of the film.
This is the plan? Are you crazy? This will never work. Oh, Mufasa, you've been up there too long. Your head is in the clouds.
You'd assume this would be due to James Earl Jones not being available, but no, he did actually record new dialogue, and this was purely a creative decision, which you've got to respect. Showing Mufasa just vibing in the sky constantly would have lessened the impact of his death, where instead we have a payoff where we finally hear the voice of Mufasa at the end of the film.
Well done, my son. We are one.
Behind the scenes footage shows Jones recording additional lines thought to be part of a dream sequence that ultimately went unused.
You have let your family break apart, and in doing so, you have broken the circle of life.
Okay, now we're into obscure territory. The Lion King, Simba's Mighty Adventure was a video game that released in the year 2000 for the PlayStation and Game Boy Color systems. Perhaps unsurprisingly, not many of the original cast reprised their roles here, but interestingly enough, James Earl Jones did, providing new voice recordings as Mufasa to help guide the player.
To protect yourself, Simba, you must learn to roar. Press the roar button to scare your enemies.
Simba!
Well, enough of that.
Timon, what are you doing?
I'm fast-forwarding to the part where we come in.
The character can be seen in 2004's The Lion King 3 Hakuna Matata, as it takes place during the events of the original movie. However, no actual dialogue was necessary.
But it's the best thing for us. I mean, for him. Ooh, let's go, Pumbaa. I think the storm's coming to a head.
As was the case with other cameo appearances from the character in the likes of House of Mouse. So Jones didn't return, and it didn't seem like he ever would again, given that there were no further additions to the Lion King franchise over the next decade, and the actor was now in his 80s. However, that all changed when a TV movie titled The Lion Guard: Return of the Roar aired in 2015. This was a pilot for the Lion Guard series that launched shortly afterwards, aimed at a much younger audience on Disney Junior. Though somewhat faithful to the original films, many of the character designs and vocal performances are wildly off. But something they definitely got right was Mufasa's appearance in the TV movie, for which James Earl Jones triumphantly returned.
Hey, Kabisa. Are you?
Yes, Kion. I am your grandfather.
This would be the final time he voiced the animated version of Mufasa.
The roar will be there for you when you need it. And so will I. Until the Pride Lands end.
Now, the visuals aren't quite up there with the original, but this would have been a great send-off for the character after all these years. So of course, in the subsequent series, they recast Mufasa, which is like sacrilege and had never been done before. Then they have him pop up in the sky and dish out advice every other episode, which is ironically exactly what they try to avoid in The Lion King 2. Gary Anthony Williams voiced the character for the remainder of the series.
Confidence doesn't come from what others think about you. It comes from inside yourself.
Thank you, Grandfather.
Which brings us to the end of The Lion King's animated canon. Disney then decided to remake The Lion King in 2019, with stunt casting that saw every actual voice actor replaced, all except James Earl Jones as Mufasa.
Well, look who's come down to mingle with the commoners. Sarabi and I didn't see you at the presentation of Simba.
Now aged 88, and just a few years since The Lion Guard, his voice had noticeably deteriorated.
Is that a challenge?
Is that a challenge? Not always, Scar. One day, it will be my son who rules. Simba will be your king.
It's since been discovered that some of his lines were taken from the 1994 original and dubbed into the live-action movie.
Hold on, Simba! I'm coming, Simba! Hold on, Simba!
So time and time again, this soulless cash grab of a remake proves to be the definition of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. but it was undeniably chill-inducing to hear the voice of James Earl Jones as Mufasa once more, alongside Hans Zimmer's iconic score, for its nostalgic value, if nothing else, as frankly it's difficult to imagine anyone else as Mufasa.
I never left you, and never will. Remember who you are. Remember.
Now, presumably, this was the last time that he ever voiced the character. I say presumably as there is a sequel/prequel to the live-action remake, titled Mufasa the Lion King, that'll release later this year. Bizarrely, the cast list does not include James Earl Jones, despite him literally being Mufasa, as the film instead follows younger versions of the character, to be portrayed by Braylon Rankins and Aaron Pierre. It's not impossible that Jones recorded a couple of lines and makes some kind of cameo appearance in the film. Do we even want that, given how hated the live-action films are? I don't know, but we can at least assume that it'll be dedicated to him, as Jones passed away just a few months before the film is set to release. Regardless of live-action remakes, the legacy of James Earl Jones will undoubtedly live on for years to come, but also in a more literal way than you might think. In 2022, Jones signed over the rights to his archival voice work so that his voice could be recreated using AI, which has already been used for Darth Vader's appearance in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series to great effect.
Have you come to destroy me, Obi-Wan?
Apparently, the AI company works very closely with Jones and his team. They could use somewhere around 10,000 different files to create just 50 lines of Jones's voice. That is amazing.
And you can't have Darth Vader without James Earl Jones.
No, of course not.
So Disney could hypothetically do the same for Mufasa, but I don't think anyone wants that, and I don't see how AI could ever hope to capture the emotion and humanity that Jones has consistently brought to this role for the past 30 years. People tend to forget it's not just the sound of a voice that makes it recognizable. It's the way in which the person chose to use that voice, how to play it like an instrument. And the voice of James Earl Jones was born out of an extremely specific set of circumstances that were exclusive to him, and you can't fake that. Because believe it or not, people recognize and appreciate a performance that's genuine, which we know is especially true of Mufasa, as the original Lion King.
That's very good.
Doing voice for animation is probably acting in its purest, most ancient form. It's a bit like the Greek form of acting in the ancient Greek where they had masks on. In our case, the mask is the animator's drawings, you know. I didn't want to invent a character. I just wanted to talk as me. I want to be as straight as possible.
Just remember that those kings will always be there to guide you. And so will I.